comply with. So, so those are just my preliminary observations. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Colette and I'm teaching the adult education section. I am within the Institute for Post-School Studies. I'd like to ask how we know when we're succeeding with the decarbonizing project, say for example at our university, what would be the signs of that? And would it be true to say that we are possibly all in an agitational phase at the moment because we don't seem to be talking about what the underbelly might be and what the dangers might be? And is there anything emblematic about what it means to be a decolonizer at UWC, for example, because the reference has been made that we are not all the same, and I would hate that we should all become the same. But are there any principles that we should be embodying by virtue of the fact that we are taking a salary from UWC as part of the decolonizing project? So another
Of course.
I'll take yours as a comment. Collect had a question.
Okay, my name is Austin Jaconia from Information System. And I'm just also of the view of contextualization by decolonization. Because if we look on different disciplines, we have moved different areas with different worldviews. I can take, for example, in our own case, we have got a lot of success stories in terms of technologies that are coming from Africa that are applied in the first world. So if we create more content in material, then we are able to move ahead with the agenda. I can give an example of business management. If we look in many universities in South Africa, they are using local books which were actually written by local authors because the books are there. But if you go to other disciplines, most of the books we only have their foreign books. So we have to look at the different approach for different disciplines because there is no one size fits all in terms of implementation. So the issue of contextualization is very important.
Anyone of you want to deal with Colette's question?
I think I have a very simple answer to that. I think we need to look at other competing views. So for instance, in economics, I was trained with neoclassical economics. There was no recourse to other competing views, the issue about scarcity, dominance, and all that. And that's what we teach, because that's how we're trained. And I think it's time that we begin to look beyond, the areas that we focus on and see other competing views and see how best we can inculcate some of those ideas and values in what we provide as knowledge in the university.
Yeah, I think we are in the contestation phase, and as UWC, we have to take the contestation phase very seriously. There was a decolonial turn in 2015, and if we're going to play games that it's business as usual, and then we would not be able to start repositioning our curriculum, reconstructing and moving ahead. I think that the contestation phase is very important because we're living in a deeply racialized society. We have a state now which is a neo-apartheid state, which means that the poor people are getting poorer. And we have major social issues to such an extent that we have more service delivery protests and poor revolution than we had during the P.W. Botha regime. So those are the realities that we face. More pressing is that the underachievement of students. There's only 16% of black students that come into university. And what percentage of that, overall, nationally, pass? Only almost 50% of black children don't end up in matric, which means that the system is failing. So the university cannot we cannot carry on the way it is without looking more seriously at issues around epistemology, what we teach, how we teach, etc.
I must admit I'm somewhat disappointed at how the imagination of the discussion seems to have been reduced to changing curriculum content. Because if we're going to look at this university in the context of colonialism, then as my colleague was just saying, we have to look at a university existing in the context that I think is rightly described as neo-apartheid. We were talking about your neoclassical education, okay? I think it's fairly obvious to anybody living in Cape Town that we're living under a racial capitalist system, a patriarchal racial capitalist system. We've seen the murder figures that came out recently. We've seen the reality of our students. If we actually go look, mostly we don't have those statistics, but the statistics that do exist suggest that between 50 and 75% of students at South African campuses are food insecure. Okay. That means that they don't have access to sufficient nutritious food. Now this is not unusual because we know this is happening with our larger society. But now if we look at that again, then that food insecurity is not happening in an even terrain. It's happening according to the terrain of racial capitalism. This is not happening by and large to white students, you know. We speak about the 2015 etc. period. Okay, during that period, there were more than 40 UWC students arrested. Okay, there were 2 incidents of mass arrest on this campus. 10 students in the one case and about 30 in this other case. Those students spent literally years going through the criminal legal justice system. When they arrived in court, they had to pay 3,000 Rand bail each. Okay? The way that those students were handled reflects once again the racial system that we face. The students from the University of Cape Town who ended up at Wynberg Court were paying typically between 300 and 500 Rand bail. The ones here from CPUT and UWC were paying 3,000 Rand bail. I don't think that, I think the legal scholars can maybe go and investigate that. Okay, but those students were then acquitted after being in the legal system for some years. I don't think anybody here in this room knows much about what happened there. These were UWC students. This was part of the encounter between students and the university. So when you talk about the encounter between the students and the university, what is the encounter of your student? 3/4 of UWC students are first ones of their family ever to come to campus. What is the encounter between that student and your department, and how is that encounter filtered by lenses of ability, of race, of gender, and of class? Okay? So when they're arriving in there, they've never had perhaps access to a computer. They come there are some people who, they've been playing computer games as a teenager. They participate in the digital native culture. Are we the same university for all students? These are the questions. Besides, curriculum is of course significant, but besides curriculum, there's so much more to the encounter between the university and the colonial than just curriculum. And this is enforced across the entire university system. If you look at the so-called successful universities in South Africa, you must also look at what data is DHET collecting. What data goes into HEMIS? And that data, I can show you the principal component analysis, systematically favors the universities that were historically white and that didn't merge with any historically black universities. So the entire higher education system maintains in structure the legacy of apartheid colonialism. Okay? And then here we sit, and we cannot simply just say we're going to do a few curriculum changes, or we don't understand what decolonization means for us when we are embedded in the historical situation of racial capitalism like we are today.
Peter, can I maybe just make a comment? Remember, this is our series every week. It's such a pity you went here on Tuesday.
we were dealing with that on Tuesday. A whole broad sense of what are the kind of factors that either inhibit or impede or lead to success at university. We were unpacking those. It's a pity that we couldn't put everything in the same day, but that is what we are busy with our retention and success framework that hopefully you guys will be engaging as this is now going to faculty. So you might want to chat with Sue and with Vanessa Brown. And it is actually so comprehensive, it goes beyond curriculum. Today, of course, the brief was that we're looking at decolonization of the curriculum. We also look at it from the perspective of how do you take, once you've settled on what kind of notion decolonization would mean in relation to the co-curricular program, for example, which we haven't engaged with today because we were focusing on just so that I can sketch the context of that. It is not that those factors are not, we listed all of them, the food insecurity, the psychosocial health and well-being, the system, the infrastructure, all those things were plotted and we discussed that quite comprehensively in the student success and retention framework and the first day experience looking back. And we've done cohort studies, so we actually have data. We've done cohort studies for 2 years to try and understand where our students are coming from. So you're quite correct, we have more than a 50% dropout rate, which is quite concerning. Just in terms of context, so that we don't see these sessions in isolation, but that they actually feed into each other.
So, Peter, to answer your question, I mean, in my department, I mean, we have done, there are some actions which have been taken, I mean, on that. Looking at, you know, I mean, computer science is something that some of our students, as you say, they are coming from a poor background. They've never they don't own a laptop, they don't own anything, and they go into computer science. It's kind of, they are kind of, initially, they have some kind of fear. So, obviously, what we do, we try to provide support, and I think that the university has mechanisms of this mentoring, even on race. Some of our students are involved in mentoring, I mean the new students who are coming in computer science, especially the first year students. So we started also providing some kind of support during the weekend. So some of the lecturers, they open the lab and support the student, but obviously you must take all these on a holistic view because it means that, I mean, okay, the lecturer who is teaching during the weekend is kind of not normal hours, and also you must look at, I mean, how many lecturers do we have, I mean, for that, and so on. So, but, I mean, yes, there is some support which is being provided, but maybe it's not yet sufficient, in fact.
I saw a hand over here. Lady will say, you can maybe give your, over at the back and the lady will, black and green. Oh, sorry, Dr.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a comment about, specifically related to health and health professions education and the discussions that we are having. To be contextually relevant, we always mainly looked at, for example, the local burden of disease and ensuring that we are responding with curricula to this local burden of disease. But our current discussions around, within the current context of relooking the curricula, we are looking at things like, so who is creating the knowledge, but not just who's creating the knowledge, also who's sharing the knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. I think my thing aloud has been partly answered because my question was based on filling the gaps of what the colonizers have left. And then I was thinking to myself, what is it that we'll be filling in, because colonial education has been there for years. If I fill in, or if we fill in that gap, are we saying whatever that is there is right, but there are certain things that are left behind, and therefore those that were not there when the structure of that colonial education was being constituted, they must fill in the gaps. Then what is it that am I feeling? Where am I? So that's where I'm at. Thank you so much.
I've got a comment, it's possibly a question to all the panelists. I'm from the library, and I hope you will firstly agree that the library is a crucial partner in supporting teaching, learning and research. And there was a comment about books earlier, which I didn't quite hear. But how do you see the library's role changing? Do you see large-scale changes in what is prescribed by academics, what is recommended reading? How do you see that changing? I mean, obviously a large part of our collections are Western or imported knowledge, if you like. So that is a consideration. I think that all the faculties departments should be taking under discussion when they talk about decolonizing.
I just want to make a comment, and I actually referring to Prof. Reddy's presentation, because I think we all talk about decoloniality, but I think we should have conversations around what does it mean regarding coloniality, because we can only decolonize once we understand coloniality. And I'm not saying we don't understand it, but I think it's to open up the discussions and have, we call it, Professor Lava, courageous conversations before we even think about changing the content of the curriculum or trying to decolonize the curriculum. I think we should have a platform where we actually discuss that, and people have the courage and to share what they understand and the meaning of these different terms and the different dimensions of decoloniality.
Okay, I have a question to the panel, and I want to ask, surely South Africa is not the only country that's been colonized, because the whole continent has a history of being colonized through a purposeful means and way. Are we talking about decolonization in the South African context only? Have we looked at whether there's a blueprint across Africa in terms of what we want to achieve through decolonizing the curriculum? And then beyond Africa, have we looked at other countries that's also been colonized and what the successes and what the methodologies were in terms of decolonizing the mindsets and education and the curriculum in order for South Africa to learn? Because the one trap that we shouldn't fall into is this issue of South Africa is the America of Africa. So my question is simply just, are we just looking at South Africa, or are we looking at blueprints and comparing what we need to do in the context of Africa and other colonized countries?
My question is for Prof. Chetty. You mentioned the different views of decolonization amongst the conservative and radical academics. I want to know, can you expand on that? And does that create an issue then if we need to take decolonization forward? Should there just be one view, or how does it? Can you explain further?
So I want first of all to fill the question about filling the gap. My opinion is that when you fill the gap, you can't just fill the gap, say, okay, we had already, we have this colonial education, or in history, let's just give an example. All these books have been written about De La Rey, the King of Belgium, whatever. We don't know anything about Shaka Zulu or whatever king we had here in South Africa. That could be wrong. The problem, I think, in my opinion, is that we should do this, filling this gap with balance. There are some of the things that are totally useless. I remember when I grew up, I was studying, I knew Belgium more than even the place where I was, the DRC itself. So even, the king of my tribe, I was lucky. In my family, I was among the children, the siblings, I was the only one who knew him very well because I was going to his place. I was the one who stayed, in our city where I was born. So my family, my father was in politics, so he had to go all over. So it was not normal. One, there was quite a big history around this kingdom, and which is even influencing now up to nowadays. What is happening in the region. So it doesn't make any sense. So there should be some kind of balance. So learning all these Colonel Tomber, who was a Belgian, who killed how many people who, so that doesn't make sense. There should be some kind of balance. And also, normally, if an American is coming to South Africa, who's, let's say, studying or researching history, he's expecting to learn more about South Africa, the history of South Africa here in South Africa, than where he's in the US. So, I'll give you another example. Let's say if today you want to learn, and this answer also question, and maybe also the library, the question about the library. If you want to learn the history of DRC, go to the Museum of Tervuren in Belgium. That's where the real history of DRC is. So the history of Africa is being written by non-African. So that doesn't make sense. In fact, in this step of, let's say, filling the gap, we need to have some kind of balance. Anyway, but how are we going to implement this? I don't know.
Okay, I'm not so sure about the order, but I made some notes, so I'm not sure who I'm answering. In terms of colonization and what is colonization, etc., I'm afraid that we should not play games that we are being naive, because there's coloniality of power, there's coloniality of being, there's coloniality of knowledge, and we have to start asking questions about the brutality of almost 4 decades of racial oppression. Previous to that, there was a colonial system. Universities are built on the British system. So I think that we need to have deeper dialogues, and we have to start calling a spade a spade. In terms of the library has to become the center of knowledge and no more on the periphery, because if you want to look at new assessment strategies, etc., and for students to create new knowledge and not regurgitate, the knowledge with the transmission mode, then the library has to play a central role in that. In terms of Africa, I think that we got to give credit to the Latin Americans for being the catalyst for bringing the decolonial theories to the fore. People like Minolo, people like Maldondo Torres. But in Africa, as early as the 60s, we had Fanon, we had Biko in 1975, we have Akili Mbembe. So, Mafeje in the late 60s, we have been talking about decolonization in Africa for a very long time. I think I answered the last question. It was Mamdani in the famous UCT speech that he gave on academic freedom that spoke about the categorization of the conservatives, the moderates, and the radicals. I'm not so sure whether that would be very valuable, because I think we should take what Homi K. Baba says, and look at the hybrid spaces as well. But the conservatives will be an easy group to work with because they will voice their dissent and they will write it down, what they don't like about decolonization, etc. It's your moderate group that is your slippery group. It's your moderate group that will talk left and they would walk right, just like the current state. And it will be difficult for us to get any decolonization with the moderate group, because they would churn out many journal articles, etc. They will see decolonization as a project, but when it comes to doing in the classroom, there they would lack. And of course, the radicals are a very important group, because radicals see no separation between knowledge and the social. And for them, transformation of society is part of the larger agenda of education.
I just want to say something about the library. I think the library is well stocked. I have had the opportunity of visiting the library many times in the past few months because of a book chapter that I'm putting together. There are valuable resources in the library, particularly from the 60s and 70s. And those interested in history, I promise you there's quite a wonderful stock there. I can speak to that. Now the issue about talking about colonization, I have just learned recently that the colonization experiences we've had in Africa is not the same. You had settler colonies, Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa. We also had non-settler, most of the countries were non-settler colonies. And then you also had what I want to call charter colonies. So these were colonies that were literally given out as concessions to companies to run. And the French will extract some rent, 50% every year. And the experiences of those countries are completely different from the non-settler colonies. And I think it's true, we need to interrogate that and understand the dynamics of the whole colonization project. Then you can have more meaningful response in terms of decolonization.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if the concept decolonization it's helping us a lot. And I think we need to go back to some of the early work of the South Americans when they defined education as a form of domestication. And they've done a lot of that, in particular Freire talking about the nature of education as domestication, and he proposed alternative form of education, which he talked about education for liberation. In this, I think we need to go back to the early 80s, where we in South Africa had major projects around people's education. And that project, almost like, are now practically deceased from 94 onwards. And I think the people that worked around these concepts were asking questions about what should education be about, and how should we change the structure of society. And I think all our qualifications should ask that question: what contribution should we make towards education for liberation? And I think that instead of using a concept like decolonization as the primary concept. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Viola. I think one of the comments that I'd like to make is that this discussion has been very, very interesting. I think the real concern that I have coming from the world of work and private sector is around this whole issue of the colonization of knowledge. So for example, if you go to the internet, which has become the resource for the world of work,